The Barbary slave trade is one of the darkest parts of history that is often forgotten and rarely talked about. However, it is an important part of our history that we must not forget. During the 16th to 19th centuries, the Barbary coast of North Africa was a major hub of the slave trade, where European and African slaves were bought and sold to work in the Ottoman Empire and beyond. The atrocities committed during this time are truly horrifying, and still today we can feel the legacy of the Barbary slave trade. Do you want to know more about it? Then watch the full video, because today we will take you to the 16th century to explore the untold history of the Barbary slave trade and the impact it had on the world. And before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The Barbary slave trade was a significant event in world history, and it has had a lasting impact on the region and the world. It was one of the largest slave trades in history, with estimates of the number of slaves captured and sold ranging from 1 million to 1.25 million. The Barbary slave trade was a major contributor to the rise of the Ottoman Empire and the prosperity of the Barbary coast. But it was also a cruel and inhumane way of treating people that made millions of people suffer. The Barbary slave trade began in the 16th century and lasted until the 19th century. It was fueled by the demand for slaves in the Ottoman Empire, as well as the desire for plunder and ransom by the Barbary pirates. The Barbary coast was a region that included present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. The pirates who operated in this area were known as the Barbary Corsairs, and they were based in a number of port cities along the coast. The pirates would raid coastal towns and ships, capturing people and selling them as slaves in North Africa and the Middle East. They targeted ships from European nations, as well as ships from the Americas and Asia. The Barbary pirates were known for their advanced naval strategies, which allowed them to capture even ships with lots of guns. The captured sailors and passengers were brought back to the Barbary coast and sold as slaves in the slave markets. Do you have any idea about the condition of the slaves? The experience of slaves in the Barbary slave trade varied depending on their circumstances and the conditions they were subjected to. Many slaves were subjected to hard labor and abuse, and they lived in harsh and inhumane conditions. Some slaves were able to gain their freedom through ransom, but for many, slavery was a lifelong condition. The slaves who were brought to the Barbary coast were often separated from their families and communities, and they had to adapt to a new culture and way of life. The Barbary slave trade played an important role in the Abolition movement. It was a big part of the movement to get rid of slavery all over the world, which was called the Abolitionist movement. It was one of the largest and most visible slave trades of the time, and it attracted the attention of abolitionists who were seeking to end the trade. The efforts to end the Barbary slave trade were part of a larger movement to end slavery and the slave trade, and they contributed to the development of international law and the concepts of human rights. Women also played a significant role in this trade, both as slaves and as agents of the trade. Many women were captured and sold as slaves, and they were subjected to hard labor and abuse. Some women were sold as concubines, and they were used for sexual purposes by their owners. Women who were sold as slaves also often had to work as domestic servants, and they were responsible for a variety of tasks, such as cooking, cleaning, and childcare. Some women worked as agents. They were involved in the business of buying and selling slaves, and they played a role in the economy of the Barbary coast. Women also helped with the slave trade by negotiating between buyers and sellers and making it easier for slaves to move from one place to another. The Barbary slave trade had a devastating impact on Europe and the Americas. Many people were captured and sold as slaves, including sailors, merchants, and even tourists. The slaves were used for a variety of purposes, including labor, military service, and entertainment. Some of the slaves were used as galley slaves, rowing the ships of the Ottoman Navy. Others were sold to wealthy households, where they worked as domestic servants or concubines. The trade also had a significant economic impact, as the ransom and tribute paid to the pirates drained the resources of the European nations. The Barbary slave trade was a major source of revenue for the Ottoman Empire and the local rulers of the Barbary coast. The Ottoman Empire relied on the slaves for military and economic purposes, and the local rulers used the profits from the slave trade to fund their governments and armies. The Barbary slave trade was a lucrative business, and it attracted a number of European powers, including France, England, and the Netherlands. These powers established colonies and trading posts on the Barbary coast and participated in the slave trade. The Barbary slave trade was eventually brought to an end through a combination of military action and diplomacy. At the beginning of the 19th century, the United States and other European countries sent ships out to fight the Barbary pirates. The pirates were defeated, and American and European slaves were set free during these trips, which are known as the Barbary Wars. The Barbary Wars were fought between the United States and the Barbary states of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunis. The United States, which had just won its independence from Britain, was trying to protect its shipping interests and keep its people from being captured and sold as slaves. The wars were fought between 1801 and 1805, and they resulted in the defeat of the Barbary states and the signing of treaties that ended the practice of enslaving Americans. The Barbary slave trade left a lasting legacy both in terms of the people who were affected by it and the impact it had on international relations. Many people who were captured and sold as slaves never returned to their homes, and their descendants continue to live in North Africa and the Middle East today. The Barbary slave trade also contributed to the development of international law and the concept of human rights, as European nations worked to protect their citizens from being captured and sold as slaves. You can still see the effects of the Barbary slave trade in things like the refugee crisis and the ongoing war in the Middle East. The Barbary slave trade was a major contributor to the displacement and migration of people, and it contributed to the formation of diaspora communities. The issues that arose from the Barbary slave trade, such as the rights of refugees and the consequences of colonialism, continue to be relevant today and are being addressed by international organizations and governments around the world. It is important to remember the history of the Barbary slave trade and the impact it had on the world. This period of history has often been overlooked or forgotten, but it has had a significant impact on the world and serves as a reminder of the atrocities that have been committed throughout history. By remembering the Barbary slave trade, we can better understand the past and work towards a more just and equitable future. If you want to learn more about the trade, there are a number of ways to do so. You can visit museums and libraries, which often have exhibits and collections related to this period of history. You can also read books and articles about the Barbary slave trade, which provide detailed accounts of the events and their significance. There are also a number of online resources available, including websites and podcasts that provide more information about the Barbary slave trade and its impact. There have been a number of efforts to document and preserve the history of the Barbary slave trade, both by scholars and by descendants of the slaves. Scholars have studied the history of the Barbary slave trade and have written books and articles about this period of history. They have also conducted research on the slave markets, the lives of the slaves, and the impact of the trade on the world. In addition to the work of the scholars, there has also been efforts by the descendants of the slaves to preserve the history of the Barbary slave trade. Many of the slaves' descendants have set up groups and communities to learn about and keep track of their ancestors' history. As part of these efforts, people have collected oral histories, researched their family trees, and made online resources and educational materials. This was today's video, but we have more interesting videos for you.